Second, preparing to live stream the webinar. I probably should have done this at 9:59 a.m. my time. All right, and we got James watching to make sure it's going live on YouTube. Done redirecting live stream. I think I can see myself. Preparing to live stream the webinar. Yep. I should have done this at Look at me hearing myself. I'm going to obviously close that. All right, guys, thank you very much. And everyone who's in the chat, thank you very much for joining us. The rules before we begin, as per usual, if you want to chat, make sure your settings are correct because it defaults to all panelists rather than all panelists and attendees. So you will just be talking to the three of us and we won't be paying any attention. So feel free to do that. Also, over the course of the discussion, if you have questions for Austin and I, which we'll be taking towards the end, there is the Q&A box. Drop them in there. We didn't take any beforehand questions, as is, the rules. And the other rule, which is very important for the Astro shows, is no personal chart questions. Because if you do submit a personal chart question, I will respond to it, and it will fuck up your life. So that's it. I think those are the rules. We will. That's it. Let's get started. And for people, I kept this as a bit of a surprise, but you may have noticed it's not just me and Austin. We have the marvelous Reverend Danny Nimmo with us, and we're about to find out why, because this is the Christmas episode. So welcome aboard, gents, and we'll hand over, I think, to Danny. Wait, have you gone quiet?
Is that better? Is that working?
Yes, there we go.
Okay, I pressed the mute button. Good start. Hello, Gordon, and hello, Austin. And
hey there.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Thanks very much for the opportunity, Gordon. I'm here to talk about conspiracy, which is a rain-shaped conspiracy. So where do I start this story? I started an organization focused on reforestation, active in Brazil, and we're doing community-focused, or community-led rather, reforestation programs. We're working with schools, we're working with indigenous communities, Black women's group in Recife, in urban setting. And what do? We sponsor sapling nurseries, and we put money into reforesting springs and riparian zones and all kinds of things like that. And we've just got a new project. We've got a bunch of projects with indigenous nations starting. We've got one with the Kaingang Indigenous Nation. They've got a very interesting symbiosis with a tree called the Araucaria Paraná pine, which is it produces lots of pine nuts and it attracts animals and increases biodiversity. So for that reason, it's really, really good for regeneration. The Kaingang, the tribe who live in one of the last remaining Araucaria forests, and this was a tree that used to be eaten by the dinosaurs back in the day. So yeah, we're working with various different groups, and the ethos behind the Reforestation organization is that we're a decentralized, anti-colonial, decolonizing network, and our model is not the empire but the mycelial network, or the mycorrhizal root network. Yeah. So we like to work underneath the surface. We don't like to tell people in the global south in Brazil where we're active what to do. We wait for people to come to us with projects, and then we try and finance them through our networks. And Gordon's very kindly offered to present his network, his wonderful network, which is, I think, in many ways very resonant with what we do. Yeah. We're looking for a new way for the new world and the old world to interact. I don't know if new world and old world are very current terms. We're looking for a new way to get along with people who do things differently. So we've got a really exciting project, and I don't really know how much to reveal, really. I don't want to reveal too much, but
because Danny and I, like, for context of people who are listening, you may recall last year, we had a Christmas drive that was less official than this because you guys are actually incorporated, but we raised money for an LGBT Venezuelan refugee youth in Spain called Ali, who I flew to Spain from Lima for a bunch of reasons that I can't tell you about until next month. But that was successful for people who are wondering. He now lives in Barcelona and has a job and a house, and I think he's even got a little boyfriend. So we did well. And that was another kind of project that makes the world better in that mycelial sense, because it turns out you can just help people. That's surprising. You can actually just do good things, and you can do good things that are stacked. So the project that I think Danny's about to mention hits all those anti-colonial, decolonial bases, right? Because there's a biodiversity angle, because there's trees, there's an indigenous sovereignty angle. And in the case of violin trees, there's an extra piece, which is making the living field, doing work for the living field itself, right? Because here we have an opportunity to do some of that historical remediation work right here on the triplicity changeover from the triplicity of terrestrial empires to air-based ones. So this is why Danny's joining us to begin with, because this particular project is this year's Christmas drive. And it's like it was with Ali. It's the opportunity, whether you've had hopefully if you've had a good year, you need to give Danny some money. If you have had a bad year, maybe a little money, we'll see. Because here's a spell. Here is an opportunity for you at the end of the year to do something at the crossover of triplicities that makes the world better on every level and is a support of the living field. So I think because Danny and I have been chatting backwards and forwards about this, and more will be revealed in the coming months. But if you want to give like a brief overview of, dare we say, phase one of the violin trees?
Yes, there is a particular type of tree. It's called Pau Brasil, Pau Brasilia. It's also called Pernambuco tree. And it's been used since the 1720s to make violin bows. The reason that violin bows don't look like bow and arrow bows, they're concave, sorry, is because this particular tree is very strong, very flexible, and it also has a certain type of resonance which brings out the voice of the instrument, unlike any other wood. So this tree is from the Brazilian Atlantic forest. It grows all up and down the coast. Or at least it used to when the Brazilian Atlantic forest had its full extinction. 93% of the Brazilian Atlantic forest has been destroyed, leaving 7%, and that 7% has been selectively logged for Pernambuco wood. So the last time a survey was done on this tree in a particular region that used to be have a high concentration of these trees, they found less than 1,500 of these trees left. And we can probably estimate that the actual number of trees standing in the wild is in the low thousands. So this tree is in the wild on the edge of extinction. And so the first phase of our project is with a guy called Marco Raposo. He's a Brazilian bow maker and quite important in the Brazilian bow making industry. Violin bows and cello bows and viola bows and all the other bows from Brazil used to be thought as kind of knockoff, not particularly good bows. And Marco was instrumental in bringing this tradition of better bow making into Brazil. Now they make world-class bows. It's quite an interesting part of Brazil, actually, because it has these German towns where people still speak German and eat sauerkraut and apparently wear lederhosen as well, although I haven't seen this myself. So this German bow making tradition lives on in this area. Espírito Santo, it's called. So Marco has decided to do something about this. The European makers of bows have stockpiled Pernambuco wood. So even if the tree does go extinct, they will be producing wood for a good long time yet, or rather bows for a good long time yet. The illegal trade is roaring in this tree. 20,000 of these 20,000 violin bows were seized in 2018. And as you can imagine, the impact is catastrophic on this species. So Marco Raposo, he decided to start planting these bows, and he planted some. 2004, he planted a few 100,000 of these. Did a sapling nursery, started planting them. He planted them in straight rows in order to boost the Pernambuco, basically the violin bow trade. And he came to us and said, we'd like to do another project like that. And I said, yeah, that's great, but can you direct some of them towards reforesting springs. And he said, oh, that's a good idea. Let's see what we can do. And he found 150 springs in the state of Espírito Santo. In Brazil, there's a massive problem with deforestation, desertification, in fact, and the waterways, for various reasons, it's very good to concentrate on waterways because they bring life to the land, and they also act as ecological corridors when ecosystems get fragmented. So I asked him to focus on springs, and he found 150 of them. So this is our project. We're launching it. I wonder if Austin will agree with the date here, actually. It's the 21st of March, which I think is a good astrological date. It's also World Forest Day. So that's when we launch our project. And then the project is quite simple. We plant 50,000 trees with Marco, or rather we grow them, or he grows them. And actually Rain, I want to be quite clear about this, Rain doesn't really do very much. We collect money and we send it to Brazil for Brazilians to sort out their own environment, which has been, in many cases, destroyed by the colonial activities of people who look like me. So Marco's growing 50,000 of these trees in the first phase of his project. We are looking at extending it now to 4 years. He actually wants to grow 500,000 trees. That's his life ambition. So that is phase one. It's very simple. We are trying to encourage the classical music community to invest in reforestation, to save the violin bow, and to potentially save the authentic sound of the violin for posterity. There are other phases of this, both with Marco, and also potentially involving other musical traditions, which are a little bit further away from the classical music world.
So for people who like, this is why Danny described it as a conspiracy, and we'll leave it there, and I'll cap and tell you what I want you to do. As you're aware, Danny's on, and it's the Lord's work, a particular decolonizing journey when it comes to somewhere like Brazil. So there are different instruments from different parts of the world. The project is this, right? You take money from the West, you invest it in Brazil so that it does that kind of ecological repair, and also invests in indigenous economic activity, and also raising awareness amongst farmers that there are things you can do with land other than just clear forestry. So the money from the West comes into Brazil, does this, improves everything it touches, and leads to an export, which in this case is violin bows, and will be other instruments that improve the living field because it makes music better around the world. So this is this year's Christmas project. And if you look below this video, or if you go to the website, you'll see a couple of things that you can do. You can donate directly. There's a donate button to Rain. You can do what I'm going to do, which is buy some of the art from the store, both of which are linked below, because the Brazilian artists that are helping Danny and Rain out have given all the money from the sale of those prints until the end of the year to Rain as part of a fundraising. So if you want some indigenous, or more specifically visionary Brazilian art, do it that way. Otherwise, donate, because the money that you guys put in now allows, this is going to be a very successful project, as you can tell, right? Like you can just sort of feel the East Coast money and the sort of English aristo money going, yeah, I can see this is a thing I would want to get behind. The phase Danny's at now is to have enough money to get that campaign in front of the right eyes. So we will be contributing money to that between now and March. So that's this year's Christmas project. Any money is welcome. Same thing with Ali. The links are below. So if you want to do some good decolonial magic this year, this is the way to do it. Do check out the art though, because you may be like, hell yes. And yeah, thanks very much. Anything you want to add to that?
Yes, I would. Again, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. One of the artists is Anderson Di Bernardi, who was one of Pablo Amaringo's proteges, let's say. And in fact, I'm also helping out, I don't know if you're familiar with Luis Eduardo Luna, who has an ethnobotanical garden and project there where they are trying to remove a invasive species from the landscape there, and support this ethnobotanical garden. So he's selling Pablo Amaringo originals, and they're quite pricey. But if you want to buy one, I'm going to find the website and I'll stick it in the chat. It's True Amaringos. That's what it is. But
that's
I'll
also
type it
on
up
the
in a
blog. I
second.
have that one set up there because there's one of them that I want that's $220,000 US. So if anyone's feeling generous, yeah.
Yeah, the cheapest one. There's a cheaper one for $30,000.
Yep.
So if you send that through us, then we get a cut
A
of that.
$30,000 painting. Where are you going to hang that? Your bathroom?
Exactly. The other thing that we'd really like, just one more thing I would like to say. If you become a member of RAIN, that means kind of a monthly donation. You will get, I don't know if I'm on camera, but you will get this bag. I'll send you that. It's made out of plastic bottles. And final thing I want to say is that we could also do with help in other areas. For example, if you're good at web design, if you run social media accounts, those kind of things. The money that will be going to this fund now will be paying for us to really launch it properly, to get a campaign manager. We've been doing this on a shoestring budget. People, so we would like to be able to give this the investment that it deserves in order to make it. We're not, and this campaign is going to be going all year. We're going to launch it on the 21st, but we want this to turn into something which is really about behavioural change in the moneyed section of England. And in fact, I had a chat with Joanna Farah, I believe her second name is pronounced, who's been on. Has been on Gordon's podcast before, just yesterday, who's a member of the New Jersey Philharmonic Orchestra, and she's on all kinds of committees as well. She's really excited about it, so she's going to be helping us out. Yeah. So, yeah, just thank you very, very much. Oh, I will say one more thing, actually. I'm going to say a final thing, if I may, and then I'll go away and you can listen to Austin and Gordon. But this story came out of me living in Brazil, and particularly if you're familiar with the podcast that I did with Gordon, it kind of ends with a particular story ends with me getting someone pregnant in Brazil. That's there's a bit more to it than that. But when I went to go and introduce myself to her parents, who and she was pregnant, her brothers took me swimming in a stream, and when we went back 5 years later to show off the babies, the stream had dried up, and all the streams in the region are drying up. And this is what's happening in Brazil. So it comes straight out of a story which might be familiar to some of the people who listen to the podcast.
Yeah. All right. Well,
thank you very much, Danny, Gordon, Austin, everyone.
No, it's brilliant. It's brilliant.
It's called RAIN. I forgot to say the name of the organization is RAIN, Regenerative Agroforestry Impact Network, and the website is rainumbrella.org.
Love it. All right.
Nice. And the 21st of April or 21st of March is great, but launch it after 2 p.m. GMT. It's actually a really, really good thing. You just got to wait for the moon to get into Cancer.
Fantastic. 21st of March after 2 p.m. GMT. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks very much, Danny. And yeah, we'll obviously stay in touch over it. It's one of the sort of premium member conspiracies we got going on for 2021. But all right. Shall I'm going to switch off your video actually, so we see more of Austin's handsome face. All right.
Oh no.
All righty, there we go. We did just mention something about 2021, sir, but here we are doing another H podcast, and as is usually the way with these things, we should do a retrospective. So. H2 recap. Fuck. where to begin? How do you think, based on what we said in June, how do you think that went?
Well, I think a lot of it looked exactly how it was supposed to look or how it was scheduled to look. You know, the sort of peak dumpster fire moments. Apparently decided that the entire west coast of the North American continent was a dumpster and that's where the fire would be. You know, we talked about the peak difficulties, starting with Mars's retrograde station, square Saturn, in early September, and literally everything caught fire. We had a fire, we had a big one get within 10 miles of us. So we had a front row seat. And one of the sort of should say, imagistic sinks. So I remember thinking at the time and talking at the time saying, instead of interpreting the configurations as they would unfold in sort of a balanced human world, I was doing Hell Realm interpretation, right? Like, what does this look like, in a totalitarian plague society? And it was really interesting to see the widely publicized photographs of major U.S. cities on the West Coast just rimmed in red, like as if someone had decided to do like a Dante's Inferno edition of those cities. It certainly felt like that too.
Very Blade Runner 2049. You look at them and go, red the whole time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was that we were talking about it as we were preparing for this episode. The man of the match for all of 2020, I think, is Mars's 500 years in Aries. Like, if you're looking for the configuration of the year, that would have been mine. I'm not sure. Would you think there'd be other ones? You don't have to pick from H2 either.
No, I mean, that was well. If we're just picking, I would say actually number one for 2020 was the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and ongoing. There was the perfect conjunction in January, which kicked things off, but the two stayed very close together for 3/4 of the year. And as we talked about in the past, Saturn and Pluto together, which we get it's actually not a regular interval, or it's regular only over a very long period of time, because Pluto is much faster and much slower at certain points in the orbit because it's highly elliptical, but it's 40 to 50 years. That's always the arcanic holiday, right? Like that's when the cages come out. It's always totalitarian and controlling in bent, and it looks different at different points in history. And we got the 2020 edition, and that was the primary theme of the year. And it was really the Mars 900 years of Mars in Aries is certainly a close second. But part of why that was so nasty was because it was constantly grinding against the Saturn Pluto. Right, Mars in Aries. If you gave that energy more room to run around like a toddler until it got exhausted, it might not have been as destructive psychically and physically. But it was it was sort of trapped by the Saturn Pluto. So those are number one and number two for me. I think Mars was no. I'll stick with that.
No, fair enough. We're obviously going to talk about because every astrologist has conjunctivitis at the moment. We're obviously going to talk about that in the context of longer time cycles, so that the great conjunction that's everywhere.
Well, let's give us props, because we've been talking about that conjunction for at least 3 or 4 years.
Yep. Yes, we have. And I was thinking about the beginning of the year when and we've got the theme of it right. So migrating from a land-based empire to, and I was saying like a data-based one, like data is the new land. And I said that in whatever it was, December or January. And so in less than a year, that's exactly what's happened. It's been the rapid build out of it so that it can basically launch inescapably now. So I think, yes, you heard it here first. And I think we captured the right language about what these things are about, and so yes. The other thing I was thinking, we also said, particularly because it came straight out of Armstrong's report that I purchased on it, that it's basically it was an Al Gore election, and yeah, that seems about right. It's very interesting. The which I think we'll get to from about February. How to be with that information is to be at that level above and to not have an opinion. Look, you can have an opinion, but to not let the opinion drive your analysis of the events. And I think we got that kind of right as well, because the temptation to drop down into the polarizing waves is greater and greater. That's another thing we've been talking about for a few years. So anything else for H2 that we were amazing about or not good at?
Those are the broad strokes. I'm sure.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
I'm sure there were some smaller hits and smaller misses. But
He,
the broad strokes were very clear in 2020.
they
That was
were.
that's actually one of the features of the year's astrology. If we're gonna read, the astrology of a period of time as a sort of topographical map, right? But like Braille, like with our hands, there was actually not a whole lot of variance. Like once it got going, it was kind of more.
Yeah.
It was and more of this, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's good. I like that because, funnily enough, I had a new sort of question for the format, and probably because it was inspired by the 10,000 years of 2020 we've just gone through, which is how are you personally sitting with 2020 now? Like, because everyone's had such a fraught year. Like, how are you at this end of 2020? Like, you know.
I think I'm still working on that. Or I should say the answers are still, percolating. I wake up, it's funny, I've been waking up over the last couple of weeks, and some days I feel like I have like a perfect and I don't know, almost sort of Taoist harmony with the variety of horrors.
Mm-hmm.
And then other days I'm just like, oh, this sucks.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, with my particular natal chart, almost all of the chief villains of 2020, the planetary villains, just got hit me directly. And so I've been looking forward to this point when, in addition to Saturn and Jupiter making their 200-year conjunction, blah, 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 and all of the impersonal historicity of that, it's also just way better for me. So
Yeah.
I have a little bit of it's basically over for me. It's not over for the world. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm still letting that's still percolating.
Yeah, that's a fair answer.
Or
And by
composting might be a better term.
yeah, and I definitely know what you mean. It's a stranger, but there's fucking less dirt in the Aquarius air. It's only been a couple of days, and I'm like, yes. It's amazing how like slightly less worse feels like a holiday.
Yeah, and that's maybe a great 2021 theme.
Yes, I think so. I think so. Well, if there's nothing less that we should. So the way we're going to format this, because we're going to talk about the way we do these shows, and I love it, is we do a half of the year. But because this half of the year that we're now coming up to requires that context, which is we sort of need to know a little bit more about the 2021 weather, just at a very high level, and it being nested in a longer thing as well. So I guess, do we want to start with Saturn, Pluto to Saturn, Uranus, or where do you want to start the
Yeah, I think
longer
that.
cycles? Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's a really important place to start.
go for it.
So, the Jupiter Saturn conjunction has deservedly gotten a lot of the attention because that's a history conjunction that comes out of the Persian astro theory of history, and so that gives us 200-year chunks. But that is, and some of that's identifiable, but much more identifiable and much more immediately relevant is Saturn's configuration with Pluto throughout 2020. And really, it was the last 3 years, but it was almost perfect for most of 2020. That shifting to Saturn being configured to Uranus for a lot of really the Saturn Uranus theme is 2021 and 2022, and these are extremely different influences. So Saturn, Pluto, as I was saying yesterday, actually, both corrupts and intensifies Saturn's order-making function, right? So if Saturn is always building solid things, there's a difference between, building a nice dwelling and building a giant prison complex. Both of those are building, both of those are boundary creating, boundary marking processes, but we could say one is much more intense and corrupt than the other. And so that's what we had all 2020. We had that sort of perversion and intensification of Saturn. Now, as Saturn crosses into Aquarius, which it just has, it will be configured for the next 2 years to Uranus. And so Uranus has, just for sort of thinking shapes, right? Saturn is this order maker. And then Uranus actually isn't a great match to the old sky god. I believe it was Richard Tarnas who proposed that a better shape for thinking about Uranus is Prometheus. And I agree entirely. Uranus is absolutely the rebel, the opposer of order, the stealer of divine fire. And just like Prometheus, the Uranian resistance is just as often flawed and just as often is punished for that transgression, but sometimes with great victory. And so what we're moving into is Saturn, the order maker, basically in a running fight or a square aspect with Uranus, who's the planetary protester, right? And we got and so instead of Saturn being intensified and strengthened with the Pluto, instead Saturn, the order making, is going to be contested at virtually every turn throughout the next 2 years, which makes a lot of sense even without astrology. I think if we're just looking at the pattern, things are likely to take. And we got a taste of this Saturn square Uranus action during the second quarter of 2020. There was a little taste there, and what we saw in the U.S. and I hate using so many U.S. examples. It's a sin that I will do contrition for.
It's all good. So so Saturn Pluto.
Let me just offer this one example. So in the U.S. and Uranus contesting whatever the order is, we in our highly polarized society, we had big demonstration protest movements along both sides of our political poles, right? So this isn't this Uranus Saturn isn't partisan. It's whoever doesn't like what's going on. It's a spark. It ignites the spark of rebellion and contest.
Absolutely. And so that's because one of the ones we were talking about before is so Saturn Pluto is locking 5 billion people in their houses, which is an act of imprisonment unprecedented in the world, in world history, right? And now that we have Saturn in Aquarius and the action is with Uranus, it's Uranus and Taurus, at least for now. And so a good example of it being whatever you got is a disruption of it is that the biggest protest in the history of the planet just happened in India, right? And it was farmers, and so it's literally the land and Taurus and Uranus. Now I find this interesting because we're obviously talking about rising civil unrest, particularly in at least to start with in Europe and the US, and then the rest of the Five Eyes will get their taste of it. But it's really interesting to look at this phenomenologically or experientially. So Uranus in Taurus is land disruption. Saturn in Aquarius is drones and monitoring and like distributed tyranny. And those two things are hitting each other. So if you're looking at the giant protests that are going on in places like Germany, we can expect to see more of that. And why I think this is interesting, what we planned on discussing is the civil unrest cycle for Martin Armstrong peaks in 2024. It gets worse and worse from here, but 2022, particularly for the US, is going to be off the hook. And the second half of the year for EU. And this is another one of those kind of like alignments. I sent you the link, the reason, and it's because we've often speculated why he hasn't returned to astrology, given that particularly for the longer cycles, there's some interesting alignments. And he had just the weakest sidestep in that recent post, which is he says, well, I don't think the planets cause these things. I'm like, no credible astrologist thinks that. There's a phenomenological take that they planets are co-present with things that they signify, but it doesn't mean that like Saturn is beaming down. Like, my goodness, right? Anyway, so
I would actually contest that. I would say that the reason
classic Uranus.
That the reason astrology is so interesting is that it is an almost inseparable bundle of causal, acausal, and what we could call like spirit causation or mind causation, all at once, right? Like there's a little bit of like thick physics causation, a little bit more with the sun and moon, obviously. There's also the, if we're extending mind beyond just human skulls, right? That the planets also have mind, and then that mind has been entangled with the mind of the Earth from the beginning. And there's the synchronistic acausal, and that's part of why astrology is so nifty, is that it's all of those at once and maybe something else.
Fair enough. All right. So given that is how we're framing, going back to like the Saturn Uranus thing, given that that's how we're framing this, do we want to talk about 2021 in general in the context of 2022 and then do the half of the year? Do you know what I mean?
Oh, sure. So
I mean it in the sense like,
let me take that and do a little thing with it.
Cool.
I would strongly encourage everyone to think in terms of 21 and 22 as a package deal. And those are two chapters, or that's part one and part two of one story. And part of that's coming from the Saturn Uranus configuration. Part of it's just, this is the Saturn and Aquarius chapter. Like, if we're just measuring historical time, there's no better single planet than Saturn, right? Just at the last 3 years, we're Saturn in Capricorn. The next two, and then it's just a quarter of 2023 with Saturn and Aquarius, and all sorts of different stuff happens in 2023. But 2021 and 22 are really a package deal, and between them have an arc.
Yeah, all right. I like that. Because when we talk about 2021, there's a couple of things that we'll probably get to philosophically at the end, which is how we have to be with this moment and these moments, tactically at least, right? So broadly speaking, in the sort of Socrates model, 2022 is worse than 2021. So
that's my opinion as well.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the EU in a second. And when we're looking at 2021 in that context, so 2022 is going to have more drama than 2021. 2021 is still going to have plenty of drama, but it's also crucially going to have some windows where we can come up for air, maybe get our shit together, maybe not have it be quite so bad. But it's more, as far as I can tell, we want to be using those better configurations with the awareness that it is a longer story, right? Does that sound fair?
Yeah. The a lot of the changes, which have a lot of there's a lot of long arc stuff that became visible in 2020.
That's the exact right way of saying it. Yeah.
And that 2020, unfortunately, also provided for many people sort of minimum possible room to maneuver, right? Like the big changes always require time and energy to to figure out what your adaptations are going to be, and then actually make those changes to match your environment better or to relate to the environment more effectively. But there was also just no room to maneuver, right? 2021, this is the whole, when do things go back to normal, right? Mm-hmm. Like, things don't go back to age of Earth normal. Like, that arc is over, right? And so the pockets, right? It's more than pockets. The clearings, I don't know how you want to put it. The nice bits of 2021, of which there are several, aren't a cessation. They don't bring an end to they don't bring an end to the difficult era, right? But it's room to work, room to move, room to catch your breath, room to, I've been thinking a lot about redrawing maps, right? Um, Maybe it's tossing out old maps. Maybe it's like scribbling over them with new landmarks and topographical changes. But human beings need time to adapt. We're good at adaptation, but we need space, right? And space. Yeah, space occurs on a lot of levels: mental, physical, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and interesting, right? So Saturn Pluto is exactly you say there wasn't space. They literally, 2020 didn't give you the room to adjust. Because readjusting my ship, or resetting the ship took 9 months, a couple of months of grieving, and then we've done a whole bunch of work to be ready for the shift in range of scenarios that has now occurred for 2021 and on. And all right, that's cool. Let's move into, because the way we talk about the next bits is probably to go month by month, or at least the first couple of months, because it might illustrate what we mean. So Jan, before or the lead up to the conference in Aquarius, what do we need to look at there?
Yeah, so the trouble signature, the primary trouble signature in 2021 is when Mars participates in that Saturn-Uranus conflict, right? Because that's already tense in and of itself, and then and Mars brings an intemperate fire to to any debate, which is likely to make it go hot. And so we have 3 of those throughout the year. We have Mars in Taurus. We have Mars, which is basically January, and then we have Mars in Leo, which is going to be second half, end of June, and then July, and then the nastiest of which is Mars in Scorpio, which is going to be primarily November, but kind of sliding into December. And so those are our trouble points. And so 2021 is not going to begin with a tremendous sigh of relief, as any economist or sociologist or anybody studying what's happening collectively would no doubt tell you. So the first month is actually an introduction to this. It's a fine introduction to the Saturn-Uranus conflict that'll then get triggered acutely at least 2 other times, or 2 other periods within the year. So that's not, it's not stepping into it's not Frodo finally arriving at Elrond's abode and having a nice rest and getting tasty elven medicine and food. Like there's another piece there.
Yeah,
I was actually saying. Go ahead.
No, you do it.
I was just saying yesterday, actually, on the astrology podcast. I think the East Asian, what commonly gets called the Chinese New Year calculation, will be more accurate for thinking about when the new year begins than our January 1st, because there's trouble before there's a reset.
Yes. Bold choice of words there. So it's funny because it's almost like we have an interregnum. I saw on Twitter that this is astrological Christmas, the Great Conjunction. Fair enough. Mm-hmm. January, this is why it's a really good month to start with. Well, it is the start of the year. It's more that even when you have more salubrious configurations, they can only work with what is already in play. So in different timelines, Mars in Taurus might mean something different. But the things that it can play with now, which we were discussing, is, for instance, millions of people being turfed out of their home in the US, right? Because the sort of embargo on being able to evict people, unless there's some last minute thing, ends. So this is when, like, as I'm watching the chat, people talking about, oh, but won't Jupiter be in Pisces by then? It's like, yes, but every
No,
time.
no, not
No.
until,
I mean in May.
not
It's
until
like
the second
in
half
May.
of May.
Yeah. It yes, but that doesn't switch off the context of everything that's happened, and all the damage that has gone on in 2020 is not necessarily visible, right? And so as we
Oh,
look
yeah.
at some space where they're going, oh well, that improves. The end of May looks all right. It does, but it is going to be improving off a base that I don't think people realize is as low as it is. So January, Mars in Taurus, what does it have to work with? What can it do? How can that manifest? Well, it can turf millions of families out of their home, right? That's not great. So that's the sort of like how this is the question. And I've been thinking about how we turn this into medicine, which is 2021 is an urgent invitation to realize. We were talking about it before. In my head, it's like going back in the history of astrology to before natal charts were a thing, to when the skies were used to determine fates of kingdoms, right? And that's what it was for to begin with. So when you're looking at this stuff, going, hey, maybe I can take a holiday here. Maybe you can, but you're alive to witness some signs and wonders, I think, is is the medicine I can offer for something like 2021. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think it's really important to see the transiting positions of the planets as inputs into an existing system.
Yeah.
Right. And so we'll get to Jupiter and Pisces in a little bit, which is a positive input, but it's a positive input into the system, into the world as it is. Right. Let's see, we were talking about kind of different metaphors that might describe this when we were doing a little planning. And I'll just go with the most brutal, which is just because somebody has stopped punching, just because you're no longer being punched in the face, that doesn't heal your face. And that doesn't stop the bleeding that's caused from the lacerations. It's literally just, there's no longer the punch input. You need significant positive input to, to come back to health.
You do.
And 2020 was, full of face punching.
Yeah. So my version of that, because as you know, I'm working on the part of the book that involves the fires and the Vasuki adventure, is the fires, because it's 2 summers, can you believe? Still not 2 years because it happened in Feb, right? But I go driving up there because it's on the way to one of my various mountain walks. And there is green growing through. 2 years later, you can tell that it was decimated by fire. And there's life there now. It doesn't look like what it used to. Just because the fire stopped doesn't mean I got my forest back. I have to wait 100 years, and that's the kind of. And we literally had Mars in Aries, so it's a botanical version of that metaphor, which is the fires may have stopped, but you now have a burned out wasteland, and so things will grow, but you don't get your forest back right away.
Right. Right, just because the cessation of the fire doesn't restore things to the pre-fire state.
Yeah,
and to be fair, and we were talking about how to sit with 2020. One of the few things that I did enjoy about 2020 was seeing some of the things which we needed to leave behind, which had endured long beyond their natural lifespan, going away. Like there's some old thinking. There's some like we can just hyper capitalist it forever, et cetera, that a lot of people are convinced that maybe that's not sustainable, right?
Yeah.
Like some of what got burnt down by 2020, we can bid a not so fond farewell to, right?
Agreed.
So not everything that got wrecked was virtuous, noble, and full of beauty.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's actually that's sort of where my head has been at now, because I had time to grieve the life that got lost at the end of Q1, and there were some parts about that probably should have gone, and I'm there and ready to think about that now. But that's good. It's a getting rid of things. Yeah, you're right. The fire burns down bad buildings and good buildings. Yeah, I like it. All right. Is there anything else?
There is. Yeah, I'd just like to extend that grief piece a little bit, because that was something I spent a lot of time with during Q3. I don't think it was a huge part of our Q2 conversation. And some of the one of the things, part of how I was feeling during that time was like I was attending the funeral of, like, let's say, I don't know, like a drunken asshole of an uncle. My uncles are great, but I hear some people have drunken assholes of uncles. Where like, he's kind of a piece of shit, but it was still a person, and you have this fond memory of when you were 7 and he took you fishing, and like that. There's a complicated grieving, because grieving is often complicated, right? When the person was just wonderful, that's its own thing, but in some ways that's easier to let go of. It's when you're like, I don't know how to feel about that, right? Like, was that life cut short? Was that just in time? Did they deserve it? I don't know. I'm kind of not going to miss them. Maybe I feel guilty about that, but I kind of am going to miss them, and maybe I feel guilty about that. You know, I think there's a very complicated, you know, there's a complicated grieving process that's going on for a lot of people at some level.
I think you need to center it too, because I mean, there are reasons why I got there before a lot of people did, in terms of like, there's stuff you want that's never going to happen. I had $30,000 worth of travel just for 2020 that had to get refunded over a course of months, right? So there was things that just aren't. You need to give yourself, everyone needs to give themselves the speaking of the space, now that we're getting closer to have it, you need to, it is okay to be sad about things that aren't going to happen, right? It is part of letting them go. So yes. Yeah. Is there anything else about January that we like, speaking of letting things go, anything else we need to talk about before we get to the Bretton Woods in Aquarius?
No, I mean, just look for look at the January introduces the Saturn-Uranus dynamic very boldly and clearly. And with it being Mars on Uranus and Taurus, what we're looking at the solid things, the material things, the food and shelter being the flashpoints, right? And we have a looming eviction and foreclosure crisis. There's a lot of disruption of food production in 2020, and a lot of that's baked in. You know, that is bleeding from wounds that were inflicted in 2020. But until there's treatment, that bleeding will continue, right? And so we get a little torrent of that in January.
It could also, we'll see. I mean, I'd be very surprised if this happens, because having worked on projects for the EU, they are never on time, put it that way. But the rumor is that the digital euro, they're trying to get that done for January, and a digital currency, which we're going to get one way or the other. Digital currency replacement is quite a Uranus and Taurus thing for somewhere like
absolutely
for somewhere like Europe in particular. But
I would say for just real quick, for people thinking on Uranus and Taurus, food, money, shelter.
Yeah.
Right. Like
cool.
that's what's there.
All right. So do you think, I mean, everyone's looking forward to the end of May, but do you think, are we about to talk about the most interesting space weather of H1?
Yes, not necessarily the most fortuitous, and not necessarily inherently malefic, but the most interesting. I'll go with.
All right.
So that interesting space weather is that we get the Sun and Mercury and Venus, and for a time the Moon, all gathering in Aquarius with Jupiter and Saturn. And so for about 2.5 days, we'll have 6 of the 7 visible planets all in the same sign. Literally everyone but Mars, right? Who's contending. And so, but, Sun, Mercury, Venus are all very quick moving compared to Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter and Saturn are in a sense announcing this epochal shift, and then we have all of the more human speed planets, Sun, Mercury, Venus, all convening with the historic Jupiter, Saturn, and then the Moon for a few days as well. And so yeah, it's quite the convocation. It's it's the new plan, and that's going to be true. That's going to be true on like a big, policy level, but it's also going to be true on much smaller levels, right? Because we will have just come out of there's a little bit of lingering Mars and Taurusness, but the real flashpoints are in January around that. And so we will have just everyone will have gotten an eye full of that. And so this big question of like, what's the plan, right? And that's personal, that's organizational, that's macro organizational. It's what's the plan? All the planets but one gather together to think about what's the plan.
Which, yeah, that actually fits from a policy perspective, and it's probably not going to be good if we're talking about it predictively. Just to throw in the Armstrong bits, the civil unrest that rises in Europe, there's a big spike in the model from Feb to May for the EU, and there's also the suggestion that you will at least have a legally recognized president, not for 58 million Americans, but you will at least have a legally recognized president by then, and part of that appears to be the rumors are 100 days of lockdowns and masks. So that seems to that's from Feb, so that does seem to time as we'll start to see from a policy thing how the plan plays out. And when those two, when it's Europe and the US that does that, the rest of us follow along. So it's going to be interesting. It does rather bring us to the opening up of, which we'll obviously talk about towards the end, but like, if that happens, that does kind of bring us to Jupiter in Pisces. So it may well happen.
Well, what's interesting is how relatively uninteresting March and April are. It's not that there aren't, events, but they're not, there are no spectacular ingresses or historic conjunctions, or, dumpster fire sparks. Like it's very, they're very like follow on months from February. And then we really get like the new inputs in May.
So how often because it is historic, right? Like how often do we get 6 of the 7 all in the one spot like that? And also, I guess this one feels more historic because it has come straight after the Great Conjunction and is in that sort of context. So that it seems like it's a rare gathering, right?
Oh yeah. To quote Chris Brennan from yesterday, which I really wanted him to be on a rocking chair when he said this. He said, "I haven't seen a conjunction like that since 1962." It was so good, and all the love to Chris for that. It was just funny. It was just like, I'm gonna say shit like that when I'm 80. But yeah, there was actually a massive pileup in Aquarius, and I believe it was also an eclipse. And I'd seen that chart before in a different context, but I don't remember, in a biographical context. But I think it's been 60 years. It's
Gotcha.
very rare to have, because it's very rare to have 6 out of 7 in one place.
Yeah. All right. So when you say there's very little going on comparatively, what else is going on like March, April before we get to a few breaths of fresh air?
Well, it's really just kind of, it's like normal year stuff would be the way that I would put it. It's like, oh, that's kind of nice, and it's kind of a pain in the ass. That's it's just, it's given the the jagged topography of the rest of the year, which has, you know, Paradise Valley and I don't know, Hell Canyon. It's you know, it's rather unremarkable. It's not a set of inputs that changes the terrain,
That's
right? Especially
yeah, that's the right way of thinking.
that's what
about
I
it.
mean.
Cool. Yeah, I love it. All right. You mentioned the eclipses. Do we want to do May next, or do we want to talk about the changes in eclipse, or what to look for eclipse wise for H1? Anything?
Well, sure. We don't get an eclipse until the last portion of H1.
Yeah.
So one thing that happened in 2020 eclipse wise is that we shifted out of a Cancer Capricorn eclipse cycle into a Sagittarius Gemini eclipse cycle. And our first like full installment of the Gemini Sagittarius eclipse cycle was the very end of November and middle of December. So just passed, right? We had there was in a very I don't know, ominous, strange, and pointed manner of the omen display. The electors in the United States voted Joe Biden in or agreed upon it. I'm not sure what the technical terminology is, but the electors voted Biden in, and we had the first, at least publicly publicized injection of the vaccine on the day of the eclipse. So, you know, a total eclipse, making a point. And we're in that, and so we're in that sequence pretty much until through all of 2021. We start to jump forward into the next cycle in November. We have sort of a half in the old one, half in the new one at the end of 2021, but we're basically in that Gemini Sagittarius eclipse cycle.
Yeah.
And so one of the good things about the Gemini Sag eclipse cycle is that it means that the eclipses and what Saturn is doing have separated. That was part of the how should we say the malefic overdose that we had in 2019 and 2020 is that we had eclipses on top of Saturn with Pluto, and so it was just putting, you know, it reminds me of the oh god, what's it called? It's there's like a magical poison that you see attested to in certain esoteric Chinese stuff where you put 5 poisonous animals, you seal them all alive in the same jar and let them devour each other and then decay, and it makes you like a quintuple strong poison that you take out at the end.
Also, how you make hot dogs.
But yeah, like the 5 like, you know, the 5 venomous animals, like there were at least 3 or 4 venomous animals in that earthenware crock with the eclipses on Saturn and being activated by Mars. And so the eclipses where the eclipses have gone to is, at least it's a different crock than what Saturn's brewing.
Yeah.
And you know, and Mars is normally Mars is relatively swift, right? It's, you know, about 6 weeks per sign. And so Mars will be occasionally spitting hot fire into those crocks, but is not just sitting in the same place as it was for a lot of 2020.
Yeah, that was because we haven't spoken, did we? Because that was my death configuration, the one at the end of June, because all that shit happened the final one, right on my goddamn birthday. And I did, that was what I'm talking about, the grief thing earlier. That was the death of Gordon the Grey, the one that got to move. He's gone. Like I am a statistic of that. That was the final end of it. And I was at Cradle Mountain, and I asked the Cradle Mountain spirits what to do next, and consequently, that's why I'm president of Permaculture Tasmania and so on. And it was a kind of repositioning on a local basis rather than the grey pilgriming around the world. So I for one, am very fucking glad.
You were a victim of the goat god of death.
I was, yeah. A final show.
How we started talking about that Saturn in Capricorn a couple years ago. That
Yeah.
that paid off with unhappy accuracy.
It did. It made it to at least one T-shirt though, so take the good with the bad.
I've been thinking about how to transition that into Saturn and Aquarius, and I was like, maybe it's like the Aquarius, the water border, rather.
Oh, I like it. Yeah, yeah. It's something like that, isn't it? Yeah. All right, cool. Well, we'll see if
it's not all bad, but
yeah, yeah. Alrighty. So everyone wants to talk about, and I get it. It's really interesting to think about it this way. You're right that we psychologically want the end of this year to be the end of things and a great reset of our own, and it won't be. It's more of the same shit until February, and then it'll be different same shit, but at least it'll be predictable or at least we will once again, as we kind of did in Q1, end of Q1 of last year, from a kind of plan perspective, the Archons are going to show their cards again, right? And we're going to sort of see that. But hang on, why was I talking about that in the lead up to Jupiter? That's it, because everyone's looking forward to Jupiter in Pisces as the kind of like 5-month delayed Christmas. And there's good reason for it. But is there anything we need to talk about before we get to the good news of H1, I guess?
Well, see, now I just want to slow it down and continue to tease. And so I've got one piece that actually fits there. So even though Jupiter isn't in Pisces until mid-May, Jupiter is not in Capricorn, conjunct Pluto, and getting sat on by Saturn already. It's actually today, the day that we recorded this, is Jupiter's ingress into Aquarius. And so Jupiter is, how should we say, if Saturn is just the harsh contours of a situation, then Jupiter is what can we do to improve this? And a really important part of 2020's DNA was that Jupiter was in the absolute the most disabled condition possible all year, right? And so basically, there are no good answers, right? Or the answers make things worse, or the answers do as much damage as they help, right? Like with the the care package, which helped some people, but also was a tremendous upward transfer of wealth, right? Like that's a Jupiter conjunct Pluto and Saturn and Mars with eclipse stuff near it sort of answer or help. And so the just Jupiter not being in that horrible condition is way better, especially from our baseline, right? Our low baseline. Jupiter can do stuff in Aquarius. It's not completely disabled. So even that will feel like a nice input once we get past the super tight conjunction here at the end of December. And our consolation prize is that Jupiter speeds through Aquarius, and we get about a 2.5 month. I wouldn't even say preview, but early first installment of Jupiter in Pisces. And so from a technical point of view, it's not only Jupiter is completely unimpeded during that time and in a place that it is extremely strong. So if we're looking at good inputs, like that is Jupiter's time in Pisces, mid-May through the end of July, is an unambiguously good input.
Yeah.
Right.
But I didn't put into, as we said before, a system that may not work, because my book will be out then late May-ish, give or take. And I was talking to the Scarlets about being somewhere, making use of that weather to be somewhere for a book launch, right? But at the moment, like, Australians still need permission from the federal government to leave the country, and I don't think I would get it, right? So we'll see if that's still in play by then. When one can only hope. But that's it's unambiguously good inputs into a specific system. Just leaving all the other Aquarius stuff aside, what does Jupiter teach in Aquarius? Because it seems to me, come February, where we are in a better position to ourselves get a true insight into the plan, if you will. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I would say in Aquarius, Jupiter teaches system upgrade and planning. Aquarius, so both Capricorn and Aquarius are Saturn ruled places, and so they both partake of time and thinking about time. Capricorn is more past oriented, more history oriented, and Aquarius is more interested in the structure of the future, right? Which, and I would say that Saturn ruling the future as well as the past, right? Because both are within the contours of time.
Hmm.
Is its own quiet argument against life being anything that you make it, and anything can happen.
Yeah, fair enough.
Time has a shape, right? And that's not the same thing as a single trajectory, right? It's not just a narrow hallway, although it does narrow at certain points. And that Jupiter offers assistance with thinking through trajectories that branch from this point, right?
Cool.
And we'll see that on like a macro planning level, but that's also true on a personal level. It's like, okay, given like it's actually, to borrow a phrase you've been using a lot, Jupiter in Aquarius is very good for scenario planning.
Good. Yeah, no optimism without scenario planning. And
whereas Jupiter in Pisces, I think we can safely say brings the rain.
Mhm.
Right? It's just sort of like here's some life-giving nurturance to whatever you've planted, whatever you've got. And of course it depends on do you have a cistern, right? How much rain do you gather, right? Because if you don't prepare to meet a happy rainfall halfway, then it's over as soon as it's over, right? But if you're refilling the cistern, gathering thunderstorm water, in small jars with glyphs on them, that's a different thing. It makes me think of the specific role that you see a lot of the sky gods associated with Jupiter, like Zeus or Jupiter, the rain, like literally the rainmaker. There is an Orphic hymn specifically to the rainmaker, right? They're different functions for that complex, but that rainmaking complex is I think the right angle to take for Jupiter in Pisces.
Cool. I mean, it'll be winter here, so that's probably gonna happen. But hopefully you guys get a party girl summer. That will be good. You guys in the northern hemisphere.
So the May looks nice, and then it's like mid-June. We start seeing the next round of we start seeing things souring. Jupiter's still there, right? Like that part's still good. The rain is still coming, but we have the next round of Mars being configured with Uranus and Saturn gearing up at that point, right? And that'll be Mars when Mars goes into Leo. Then we're set up to have angularity, hard angles between Saturn, Uranus, Mars again, and then it's really second half of June, and then that coincides with the delivery. The eclipses sort of lead into that, and then we've got a rough July that's going to follow, right?
All right, party girl late spring, not party girl summer.
Yeah. The first part of summer is rough. First part of summer is absolutely attention or northern hemisphere summer, but Q3 begins with it'll be loud and pissed off, and maybe it'll be righteous, and maybe it'll be stupid. It's life, right? It's people, so it'll be both.
Yeah, and it'll also be like where you are, because when we were planning this, we took a peek at the EU's chart, right?
Oh, well, yeah. and just yeah, and so one of the general but useful themes to note in 2021 and 22 is that the tensions and the dynamic action and also the shit shows are going to be in fixed signs, whereas 2020 was very cardinal. Right, cardinal is beginning energy, fixed is ongoing, and also if you're looking at the charts of nations or people or organizations, different people, different organizations, et cetera, are going to get it, are going to get it worse. And it'll be the fixed stuff that really has a hard time during that, or that is really challenged during the next 2 years. And so the EU chart is overwhelmingly fixed. And the United States chart is not exactly lovingly caressed by by the next couple of years. But I think astrologically the EU chart has it hands down worse.
Yes.
And that's not that is during January, that is during early Q3, and that definitely is during November. It's just the pattern of the next 2 years grinds harder against the EU chart.
Because isn't the eclipse is on something crazy in November, isn't it, for the EU's chart?
Yeah, we have a lunar eclipse right on top of Caput Algol,
Oh yes.
which is, you know, with a lot of caution and thought, workable on a personal level, but as far as the way Algol contributes to history, it's it's a bloody nightmare.
Yeah.
And then that's at the same time that Mars in Scorpio is reactivating Saturn and Uranus with a Mars input. November November wins my worst month of 2021 hands down.
That's an Armstrong alignment. So the rumor is that because Germany's supposed to have elections in, I think, November, but certainly Q3, and the rumor is they're going to suspend them. And Macron said something a week and a half ago that he probably won't run in 2022 because he may have to do things between now and then that will make it untenable. And so already the talk is suspending elections because the stuff they're doing leads to not getting elected again. And for people who are outside of the EU, particularly in the US, but for people who are outside of the EU or even in it, they're having bigger marches and protests than in the US. They're just not covered in the news, but particularly in Germany, but also in parts of Spain. So they are in for a real ride. And I think the February to May civil unrest upswing will have something to do with trying to synchronize lockdown plans across them. And I think after having endured all of these new, like in the UK this morning, I wake up tier 4 stuff, having endured through the winter, to be told at the end of the winter as it's starting to open up, let's just keep going on this, I don't think will go well. And the next couple of years for the EU gets it worse first, I think.
I think so. That's what I think the astrology says that very, very clearly. So that pings back to one of the things we opened with, which is the Saturn Pluto to Saturn Uranus, right? Saturn Pluto is, it's the Archon holiday. It's the, if we look at history, like it always looks like a prison planet during the Saturn Pluto conjunction. Sure. There's almost always some sort of like new and terrible disease. There's almost always like a double down on whatever power structures are there. And so that, that's one to 3 years every couple score decades. And so how should we say, the atmosphere going forward is not that, right? Like whatever damage has been done, but that's not the same thing as the same weather enduring, right? It's yes, you may have received damage from the 2020 punch to the face, and you have to figure out how to stitch how to get stitches for that cut, but that's different than a continuing rain of blows. And the space weather is not conducive to in 2021 or 2022 to, how should we say, the a universal or a wide scale acceptance of top-down authority. Like Uranus
Yes.
square Saturn is literally like, I don't like the rules, even if the rules were not how should we say, even if the rules were not intensified as they currently are, Saturn Uranus squares always question the rules. And so it's a very different thing. And if you had plans to tell everybody what to do, and they went well in 2020, you can expect that you will get pushback in 2021. Just as an example, like, so early in 2020, the Chinese response to COVID involved just getting to temporarily make the Hong Kong protests go away. Like, do they just go away forever? I don't think anybody would bet on that, right? Like, that's an ongoing source of tension. So there are a lot of things that got sort of sat on during 2020, but that some of that weight comes off, and what was already trying to erupt will do so.
Yes, I think, France did the same, where Macron used the lockdowns to attempt to cancel the yellow vest, and now there are people rioting for all these insane laws, like making it illegal to photograph the police and what have you. It's just it is. So this comes back to like how we sit with this moment, and even whatever your opinion of it's like this, right? And this is what a cycle model of any kind, astrology or whatever, offers. It gives you the ability to respond rather than react to a moment. So wherever you are ideologically with how you think the world is being managed is kind of immaterial, because we're here to talk about what we think is going to happen. And you will always have a side. You should not fight the other side. Like, you don't react, you can respond. It's impossible not to have a position, but don't necessarily operate from it, right? Respond rather than react. And I think that's important.
Oh, and as always, like, there's always a question of strategy and tactics. If we take the dynamic of a fight, right? Even if you feel, even if you are certain that you are in a fight with whatever, it doesn't mean the most effective way to manage a fight is not to attack nonstop. I'm going to go MMA here, right? The fighters that just attack usually get really tired once they meet real opposition. Once they rise the ranks, they get really tired and then they get knocked the fuck out, right? You have to manage your energy, and that there is literally attack, defense, and I'm going to bring this term in because I think it's really important and doesn't get discussed as much, but within the mixed martial arts world, as well as martial arts, distance management or managing space is actually a capability that the very best fighters all evidence, right? What distinguishes the good from the elite is not good attack and defense, it's distance and space management, right? Not when to put yourself in striking range, and when to not be there.
Yes, I like that. That's good. Two white guys talking on a podcast. I guess MMA was going to come up eventually. Yeah.
Oh, that's that's part of my brand, Gordon.
That's kind of useful. Like, so one of the things I said in the vertical line presentation is sort of don't interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake, and there's like a distance component to that as well. And maybe this is a Jupiter and Aquarius thing, because it is planning, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's depending on where Aquarius hits in your chart. Like, pick your battles, and ideally only ones that count, right? And there's been too much energy. I've actually got another show coming up about this. There's been too much energy exhausted in stuff that doesn't count. It's not going to move the needle for it. It just makes your life and the universe worse, right? This is a long haul, especially as 2022 is going to be worse. So rest when you can, restore when you can, and that definitely means, I guess, use Jupiter in Pisces. But yeah, I think that's good.
And that I think that, you know, the reason that we have to talk about this is because the understandably, but not necessarily usefully, the world is full of urgency narratives right now. And that they may be true, but even, you know, if you're locked in a cage with another combatant, there's certainly an urgency, and yet that need to manage energy and space is doubly important because it's urgent, right? You know, the natural sort of stimulus that, or yeah, stimulation that urgency provides provokes us to act without foresight.
Oh, I like that. Yeah. And this, like, why I mean, I love Bayo Akomolafe, but why I had him on the show is it's phrased so well. What if the way we respond to the crisis is part of the crisis? And it is. We're at a point where that's true, and there isn't a single intervention anywhere that doesn't make it worse. So the language needs to switch up to not finding the intervention, but when to intervene, right? Because solutionism is what is causing all of this. Literally, what is like all of the interventions that have caused this disaster have been because of solutionism. We have to fix this, we have to fix this, we have to fix this. And we're kind of, this is actually how civilizations collapse. They don't collapse because a bad thing happens to them. They collapse because there isn't a single intervention that can get a civilization out of the bad thing that happens. Like every decision is a bad one. And that's kind of where we are. That's the triplicity changeover. There isn't a single intervention that can save the West because everything we try makes it worse. And that's when you get a collapse. Historically, if you look at cycle models in the Fall of Rome and whatever, it isn't the one thing. It's that there isn't the way we operate makes it worse. And so on a personal basis, we need to stop playing that game. We need to play the next game.
Yeah. And there's also, yeah, that's well said. There's also the, how should we say, personal skill that I don't know that many of us have, but I'm feeling the necessity to develop it, which is how do you maintain your equilibrium and plot smaller scale, effective, happy arcs through a period of decline.
Yeah.
Right. The history of everywhere on Earth, we have rise and fall and plateau, and we have all of these shapes. But I think very few, especially my fellow Americans, we've grown up in a period of the rise of this country and of the West generally. And even though, there were lots of critiques and this and that, even if you were very critical, you were still on board a ship that was still a plane that was gaining altitude. And maybe you didn't like the bombs that it was dropping, but the plane was still gaining altitude. Right. And I think what living during a period of plateau, stagnation, decline, or at least especially relative to what you were born into, it involves a necessary separation from how am I doing, from how is the collective, like the nation state that I dwell within doing. Because if we're tied to exactly, as an American, if I'm tied to exactly how America is doing, I'm going to be miserable every day.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's not to say like forget about it. It's a relationship that needs to be renegotiated, right?
It does.
There is a very close Jupiter, Saturn, Earth into air parallel between where we are now and the decline of the Western Roman Empire, right?
Yeah.
And so I've been thinking about that and just like, okay, so let's just say that that's 100% correct, right? And obviously, it's not a carbon copy, but just assuming that there's a truth to that. I was like, okay, so if I was born in, let's say, 380 in the Roman Empire, and I was going to live until, I don't know, 460, right? How would I? And I knew that. Let's say I was a great astrologer. Firmicus Maternus is actually basically from that era, which is interesting to think about. He was watching that. Do I just am I just sad the whole time because Rome ain't what it used to be, right? And that it's what do we do with that, right? Does that mean like, oh, I guess everything's ruined? Because there is a certain emotional reaction that we have, be like, oh, it's never going to be what I imagine it was like during its glory days. And of course, during the glory days, right, there were lots of people ground underfoot.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
It was never, it was never. So Rome never fell, but Rome also never was Rome. Like the Shining City was never built, just as Rome never fell. Like there's a both sides to that.
I couldn't agree more. So to sit with that moment in history with coherence, like the medicine as is usual is in with the poison, right? Because you can grieve the fall of Rome until you sort of sit with, well, what the fuck was Rome? And you go, hang on.
Right.
Not exactly. We do this, whatever incarnation you get, some version of that is going to be in play, right? Good things happen to you, bad things happen to you. The world could be better, could be worse. And just why I want to center that is because I think too many people have got to the end of 2020 expecting the triplicity of Earth to come back, and it isn't. And there's a cowardice in there's a trauma and a cowardice in not looking at it, and the times are urgent, right? You don't need to solve it, but you do need to see it, and there's the good and the bad in there, and I like it. I think about that too, actually, when you look at the fall of Rome or the parallels in history, because history is cyclical, the things that people have to go through. Things my grandparents, yours as well, went through the war. I think about my grandmother and how she got a scholarship to London from Australia to be an opera singer, and then the war broke out, so all scholarships were void, and so that never happened for her. But she had a really good life, and so just this is what life is. Good and bad things happen, but you need to see what's going on and adapt and adjust to it. And maybe that's like a big Aquarian thing, is that see a shifting plan clearly.
Yeah, well, and I think that so one piece that occurred to me yesterday when I was talking to Chris and Kelly, and I was talking about map making between Earth and air, and I was like, maybe the difference isn't a revised topographical map. Maybe it's the difference between a wind current map and a topographical map, that like the paradigm for map making itself needs to change.
Yes.
Or like, what is the most relevant feature to to plot my movements in accordance with. And I think what a lot of people want, I've certainly found myself longing for, is a restoration of certainty.
Yep.
And not only is that in rare supply during a time of a historical pivot, but if we compare all the Earth periods to all the air periods and what that transition, what the before and after looks like, the air periods are always more uncertain, just as air is a much more dynamic and shifting element than Earth. And so part of the part of our internal transition into this newer era is learning to live with more uncertainty. Earth has the potential to entomb and imprison more so than any of the other elements, but it's also certain. And back to grief, one of the things that as part of the sort of complicated funeral I've been experiencing, is I found myself mourning my adaptations my effective adaptations to a very flawed system, but at least I knew what those flaws were and I
Yes.
was certain about them, so I could be like, yep, this is how I live in a sick world, right? Because I was like, those are probably, we could probably call those deformations as much as adaptations, but it's like, oh, I worked really hard. That took a long time to adapt to this version of a flawed world, and now it's passing away.
I love it, because coming back to like grief in 2020, when I look at the beginning of the year, what my goals were, obviously I lost a whole bunch of peak of career stuff. But one of the primary business goals, I think I mentioned it to you, was vitality, right? And whilst I'm not, I give myself a more than pass mark on physical fitness from beginning of 2020 to end of it. Not where I wanted it to be, but they closed my fucking gym for 7 months, right? So that adaptability and reorganization meant that I had to learn the body weight training stuff and get the rowing machine and so on. And it is, that's a, I didn't, though I didn't see a return to certainty. It's like they'll close my gym again. Like I can't be like, okay, well, I guess I'll just work extra hard when the gyms reopen. It's like, no, you need to move to a shorter planning cycle way of planning, right? Which is, well, I don't know if that's ever going to happen. So my version of that is like, well, I'm going to bring that stuff in here so that I can still achieve the goals. I think about it like scuba diving, you can see maybe 20 meters. Now you will never be able to see more than 10 meters, or at least for the next little while. You're still scuba diving, but you just need to permanently adjust. You can't just wait for the visibility to improve, which is ironic because we're moving into an air sign. But that's a really good way that's a real Aquarian lesson, right? Which is planning how to plan is okay. Well, I can't see as far anymore, right? I love it.
I love that, like, just shorter planning cycle. Like, that's so exactly right and actionable.
Yes, good.
Right, because like part of the unjust but stable empire that I grew up in was that you could, people are like, oh, what's your 10-year plan? What's your 20-year plan? And that made sense when your environment was, earth and stone. And that's not where we are. And that's not where we're going.
Yeah. And so that's excellent, because I knew it's a really challenging thing to say, and it's something I've been saying publicly. But you cannot sit around on the couch waiting for, I don't know, a vaccine and going back to the previous triplicity. It doesn't ever happen, right? And I'm just a bit alarmed. And this is a better way of doing that. It's like, okay, well, now you need to think, now your planning cycles need to be Aquarian. It needs to be shorter planning cycles and adaptive ones. And I'm into that. Like, it's still planning, it's still Saturn, but it's like,
oh yeah,
planning to plan differently. I'm into it.
Yeah, it's cool. Really good. There's a lot there.
Anything else for the H1 before we do questions? Anything else we want to add, like just as a final? We kind of know January is going to be intense. February is going to be set an agenda that will be more or less visible for the next couple of months, and then we get Party Girl late spring. It's not quite as catchy, but we all know what I mean. And then Eclipse, and then second half of June, it starts to get crap again.
Yeah.
Awesome. This is sort of a,
and by crappy, I would say heated.
All right,
heated and contentious.
Right. Does Uranus in Taurus have anything to do with the rise of Bitcoin?
Yes.
It's a simple one.
Uranus's time in Taurus is historically strongly correlated with big disruptions and changes in how currencies work as a store of value. It's exactly on schedule.
Pretty much. And yeah, given where it's, well, so that's funny because we were talking about the Uranus-Saturn configuration from Saturn's perspective at the beginning of the episode, give or take, but it kind of works in reverse too, doesn't it? Because we're going to see the central bank digital currencies showing up. So it's almost like Saturn pinging at what Uranus and Taurus does.
Yeah, well, there's a little, whenever, God, what did Napoleon say? It's like never never fight an enemy too many times, or you will teach them your entire art of war. Right. So whenever planets are entangled, they start, and we have factions playing that out in the world. Like there's a learning from the opponent, and doing a little using what worked on you last time.
Yeah,
Right?
I like
neutralizing a threat by becoming it or taking on some of its characteristics.
Oh, this will be. I don't actually. This will be a good one. The same guy, Cameron. What is the main difference, in your opinion, between how Western and Vedic traditions view the Grand Conjunction?
So that same grand conjunctional history theory is entirely present in the Vedic corpus, and there's actually a neat system where every year between the 20-year conjunction, actually every year in a 60-year cycle created by Jupiter and Saturn, actually has its own characteristic, and that's something we see mirrored very clearly in the Chinese system, right? The what gets loosely called Chinese astrology is basically the Jupiter Saturn, or it's the Jupiter cycle, but then ultimately bounded by the Jupiter Saturn, where you have 12 times 5, which gives you 60, and it's Jupiter and Saturn will make a conjunction in about the same place every 60 years. And so whether that's a Chinese influence on Indian stuff or vice versa, I don't know. But there's also a specific characteristic to each of the 60 increments in there. Now, a big difference if we're doing sort of standard Vedic with the grand conjunctional theory is that they would be when I use the sidereal zodiac half the time. If we were analyzing it from that perspective, we wouldn't be seeing this as the element shift.
Okay.
This is an element shift in the tropical.
Gotcha.
So that would be the biggest difference, but that whole structure is there.
Yeah. I just want to do a Starships thing and say I think the 60 is older than either India or China, because obviously that's a Sumerian number, because that's where we get our minutes and things from. So I think it's showing up there will have something to do with that. But,
yeah, I think that's
yeah.
entirely true, and will have physical evidence given time.
I think so. Yeah, that's cool. I like that. It hadn't really occurred to me. Good question, Cameron, because that's just actually triggered something for the next book. So I'm into that. This one's from Holly. Can you please talk about the planetary forces shaping spiritual seekers in 2021? I like that. She's got cult dynamics and conspiracy, and wellness and spiritual trends. And I'd love to know what outer planets are at work with this.
Well, so really quickly, Neptune and Pluto are doing the same thing they've been doing. Neptune and Pisces, it's really interesting. Neptune and Pisces, it's we can consider it an extremely strong point in Neptune's cycle, and it seems to just kind of, how should we say, open the way, open the floodgates of all stories. It makes it easier to imagine stories that aren't happening at all, or have only a loose correlation to the to what's happening on the ground. It also opens the way for us to think of even better matching stories. But it's just sort of, it's the the grand Sabbath of all stories. It's 14 years out of every 160 something. That's been going on since 2011, 2012. We got another 4 or 5 years of that. Pluto's in Capricorn, another 3-4 years. That's just the underworld as the brutal structure of the past, right? If Capricorn gives us past stuff, it's consistently a decaying empire, a history as a trap, but also, you might be trapped there. There's a how should we say, as we talked about a lot last year, there's a lot of work to be done with the dead, right? This is the Pluto that we'd say that's a spiritually useful version of Pluto and Capricorn, right? And maybe it's the freeing some of those dead from the collapsed prison of the past.
Well, because that's, I was going to say that as well, like the necromantic punishment, because I don't think we are being subject, and rightly so, kind of the whole idea, the world that's going away, some of it was bad. We're being subject to the punishment of the dead by the dead, because we failed, I would say, well, not just I would say, we failed to stay with that trouble sufficiently, and part of what is happening is like an ancestral curse from the people the empire murdered, and that's how these phases end. So, like in terms of what's going on spiritually, a big thing is, are you staying with the fucking trouble, and did you stay with it enough? Because now we have it. Now you can't not stay with it. Like in the Ghostbusters movie, the Titanic has showed up at the dock in New York, like, and the dead have arrived. Like we just fucking get it now. And they arrived in Capricorn, but it looks like to me in Aquarius, it's the ghosts leaving the ship. And I think I think what she means about the cult conspiracy dynamics and wellness stuff, I get tempted to say it's that line from the first X-Men movie. Do you know what happens to a toad who gets struck by lightning? The same thing that happens to everything else. So the inability in so-called spiritual seekers to face reality is mirrored across the spectrum. So in terms of like not seeing clearly, it's because people haven't sat with the mechanics of power sufficiently to have a clear view of how it actually operates, and are now in a sort of state of denial. And that's not just spiritual seekers, that's elsewhere. And that kind of dissociation triggers stuff like cults. It triggers shit like QAnon and whatever, because it's this a refusal to update. The world doesn't operate the way you thought it did the whole of your life. And you can either go, shit, I better learn that, or you can be like, nope. And I will simply not. So I think there's a lot of that going on everywhere, not necessarily spiritually. But if you don't have a practice of imperial dead remediation, I'd start one.
Yeah. So Uranus is very much, I think we can very meaningfully look at as a spiritual current. It's in Taurus. This is basically the animism, right? This is the revelatory, how should we say, the live wire, right, is not abstract. The live wire is the created world, right?
Yeah.
And it's the, the local, on a mundane astrology level, right, like the politics and economics and all that, like Uranus and Taurus is money, food, shelter, right? And on a spiritual level, it's similarly grounded, right? And so that's proceeding nicely, I think.
So this is Jay's question, is when are the most likely windows of time for travel moving, both within the US and between the US and Europe and other places? Well,
I'd guess mid-May to mid-June.
Yeah.
If I
you want to do
gamble,
good things, if you want to do good things in H1, better if it can be then, I guess, just broadly speaking.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's a little bit of there's a Mercury retrograde then, but it's Mercury while Mercury is really strong. And so one of the scenarios that I think that might translate into is a sudden rush to travel. And so, everything gets jammed, right? Because the systems have been, on partial pause for a fucking year. And so, like an overabundance of energy through the system tangles it up a little bit. But I don't think that's a forbidding thing. I just think that's a descriptive thing.
Well, yeah. I used to travel so much, you end up traveling with Mercury retrograde, and you just deal with the hiccups. Like you just, It's just more annoying, more delays or something, and cool. It could also be maybe that you return to somewhere. No, it's not quite right. But like you return to somewhere that's important to you. Because I think with just that window, in my case, especially all the places that I would want to go, I get to choose one. So like better make it fucking count.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's maybe a piece of advice, right? Like if
true. Make it count. Make it fucking
narrow down the travel dreams from I'm just gonna go everywhere, I'm gonna fucking do everything, it's gonna be awesome, to like, okay, if I have to pick.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna make sure it'll be God. If both of our countries exist and we can travel between them come May, it would be the US, so I could do like a book and member thing, and it will be. But it's one of those like make it count, because I'm not going to be able to do. None of us are going to be able to do any of that stuff with any reliability for a while. Put it that way.
Right.
Can we please? Okay, so that was sort of May. Are there any good pockets of any good dates best dates in April?
For
just says please get some dates for good pockets of time.
Oh, let me look at April. A lot of April's okay, so the last third of April, is different. So I would say consider we've got that sort of standard mixed bagness up until about April 20th when the sun moves into Taurus. But we have Sun, Mercury, Venus all hitting Uranus and Taurus and all squaring Saturn. And so that's engaging that same Saturn-Uranus dynamic, but without Mars. And so I think, I don't know. I don't know whether to judge that as that's going to be positive in some cases and negative in others. That's not just like clearly a good or a trouble. You really you've got to get much more granular than I can do in the context of this conversation.
Totally.
It's going to be like this couple days is great. Like this is not so good. Like it's a mixed bag. And so it's not like a swath of time that's just totally workable. It's a mixed bag, and it really it's a mixed bag that's dependent on what type of thing you want to do.
For sure. And
are you planting trees? Are you launching shoals? Are you starting a business? Like all of these have different answers.
All in the one day. Answer. Chris has, what big magical workings would either of you recommend for Monday's conjunction? Well, I wouldn't necessarily recommend stuff in general, but weirdly, I'm not doing that because Monday is obviously the solstice here, and I'm experimenting with the Chumash sunstone technique, where it's a tying of the sun ritual with this quartz I have for stuff that I'm going to need in my midwinter in June. So I'm actually doing nothing because the dance card is booked from a magic perspective. So don't know about you. Are you doing anything?
Well, so I actually, Kate and I sat down and thought about whether it would be wise to make stuff, what kind of stuff, when might we do that? And I pulled up, I kind of broke it down to the best charts I could find, and the cards sure didn't like making stuff.
Interesting.
What they did like, which upon reflection does seem more appropriate, the cards really liked a sort of observance, right? Like sitting with it. I think I need to kind of finish my planning on it. I think for me, because I have a very significant intersection with certain Vedic practices, I think I might be doing Brahma mantras. So Brahma is the world creating portion of that big triad in Vedic stuff. And so, but Brahma is a flawed creator. Brahma is not a perfect creator. And in at least my subsection of Vedic astrology that I've studied, in the tradition that I've studied in, we refer to a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction as a Brahma yoga, right? That it's a world creating yoga combination. Yoga is a synergistic combination. And that's certainly what it does historically, right? That's why we use it as a tent pole for thinking about history. Is that it's the flawed creator giving, doing the bringing the next phase into being. So I think unless I have a better idea, I'm probably going to do some Brahma stuff.
So I'm doing this because I'm in midsummer rather than midwinter, right? And so it's the same idea though, like the world renewal. Yoro type ceremonies. I have to think of end of June for mine. So to have did you know, I found this out the other day, one of the Chumash terms for the sun means the old man in the crystal house, because the stars are the crystal house. So anyway, I'm experimenting with that. So I'll see if I can't save up some sunlight from our midsummer, but it's a world renewal ritual, right? Because the new fire ceremony area at the back by the top dam is going to need that come end of June down here. But it's weird, we're sort of doing, the logic is the same there. This seems to be the opportunity to sit with a new world, right? That's what this is. And mine hits different because it's at peak of it. So it's a sort of all trumpets kind of thing, because mine's a midwinter. But I want to see what that is like. I want to see what that moment is like at the end of June. So I'm going to capture it. Good question. Econ question: do you see a inflationary or deflationary period, inflationary, in the near future and farther future going forward based on the space weather? Economists are getting excited on the fact that governments will open the floodgates of stimulus and fiscal stimulus. Does any of this align with what you were seeing? The inflation I am most concerned about is Uranus and Taurus inflation, because it is, and this is an Armstrong thing, it is a scarcity-based inflation, which we have already seen, and the millions of people who will die of starvation in the next few years because of these lockdowns, that's inflationary. That is a tragedy of historic proportions, but it is also inflationary. So yes, and also you're going to get both when you pivot from a system of currency to replacing currency with this digital control grid, or at least the attempt to do it, because how $100 doesn't mean what it used to, but things do. So it's going to be this really patchy up and down, but broadly up into 2024 in the Armstrong model. But yes, inflation. If there are things you need, buy them now because they will cost more later. That's classic inflation. And you have the money for it, but that's what I mean. The food you buy will never be as cheap as it is today on average, as far as I can tell. What do you think?
That makes sense. Yeah, I would agree with that. It's back to very Uranus and Taurus, right? Like we're talking about the disruption of stores of value, right? And some things are very good stores of value, right? Like material things that have a function, still, like they have an anchor to their value, whereas a fiat currency doesn't have the same anchor. And so if we're in a period where there's a disruption of stores of value, then generally speaking, we'd expect things to gain relative to more abstract stores of value.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump in on a Cameron one and a Rory one because I need both to answer it. Cameron's back with, so the sneak peek of the coming 200 years was the 80s. Is that why we're seeing this subconscious promotion of 80s vibe through media, film, fashion, music, etc.? What can we glean from the 80s that can help us in the next decade? So because Austin and I have been talking about the triplicity changeover for years, one of the things I find interesting, and this is coming to Rory's question, former Israeli defense minister recently came out saying the Galactic Federation is real and they won't recognize us Earthers until we are unified under a world government. Where does this and disclosure in general fit in with the Great Conjunction and Reset? So literally the first time Austin told me about the triplicity on the show, I'm like, oh, that's a UFO configuration, because you actually have in the early 80s, it was Bush, in fact, Bush Sr. who did this. the extension of top secret out into the corporate world, out of government, and the closure of programs like Star Wars. So what you essentially did was privatize black budget projects outside of the grasp of freedom of information requests, which tore through the black budget world in the 70s, right? So you got a hint of, okay, well, this is how we're going to do private space programs. And in the years in the lead up to it, and then bang on fucking schedule, we have not just UFO talk back, but crucially, UFO talk as air cover for the sort of control grid that the new triplicity is, but also an Aquarian one specifically, because the new control grid is air, it's space-based. So it's drones and satellites and the rest of it. And by the end of this triplicity, we'll be a multiplanetary civilization if we aren't already. So there's two things there, and I wanted to be able to answer both. I think it is explicitly a UFO configuration, and that whole, like, we better become a world government is, coming back to the 80s, a rehash of Reaganite nonsense, because he said the same thing about ending the Cold War. He's like, I wonder what would happen if we knew they're aliens. We would all come together as one planet to fight them, or whatever it was, right? So we're getting the same message as we have from the billionaire class and great resetters, that what the world needs urgently is some sort of supranational governance system. And so the UFOs are, I mean, not that UFOs aren't real, obviously, but the UFO narrative is an expected air cover for what we see playing out in the power structure astrologically. As for the 80s motifs and now, yeah, cool, why not? Maybe the unconscious is bringing that stuff.
I need to jump in. It's cyberpunk.
Yeah, of course.
That's when cyberpunk started. And I would recommend everybody, there's a great 2-part documentary on YouTube just tracking the development of cyberpunk through books, movies, and video games. And it literally starts with Jupiter, it like starts right around the Great Conjunction in the early 80s. I think it starts that year. And just some interesting things I picked up that, just scream astrology. Blade Runner and Tron were both, Tron being the first movie depiction of virtual, where half the movie is in virtual reality or like a digital space. Those were released in the same month. And then what's interesting is William Gibson, who was writing his first novel, Neuromancer, at the time, went into a panic and rewrote a lot of it because he was like, oh, I don't want people to think I'm copying Blade Runner. And then when Blade Runner finally is published a few years later, it comes out the same month as Apple releases its first personal computer for everybody. This is, and everyone's like, wow, that sure was prophetic. Like, where are we now? Like, we are absolutely in a cyberpunk world. Like, that's not coming soon. Like, it's going to be more and more obvious, but it's already pretty obvious.
Well, the premium members have their own end-to-end encrypted pirate utopia. And so I didn't expect to have to build that. Not that I did, James did, but you know what I mean. Will the adoption of widespread digital currency drive up the price of the existing ones that's anonymous? Yes, in the short term. And we're seeing that now. And every time, so with the most recent significant announcement from a Bitcoin perspective was last month when PayPal said we're now set up to transact on it. So PayPal in particular, PayPal is the op that builds out the pipes. Ethereum is the testing of how you gamify the replacement for currency, because Ethereum can kind of lock and unlock once you've hit certain achievements, like you might have walked 5 miles a day or something, right? So yes, in the short term, and then it's such a small amount of money when you're talking about replacing currency around the world with a digital system. They might let you keep it. It's unlikely. So it'll go up, 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 gone. And if you don't ever invest in Bitcoin, use it as a gamble, which we have. Like, ours has gone up a bunch. Like, it's basically a record amount. But if we wake up tomorrow and it's gone, I didn't put that much into it. So that's your Bitcoin report as far as I'm concerned. What do you think?
Oh, I don't think I'm fully qualified. I I don't think I have. Well, let me just say, I don't think I have any special insight
There
into
you
it.
go.
Like, you know,
Well, that's interesting because it would require looking at a chart of it, I guess. But John's question: any danger zones for H1 that would figure greatly for either the Philippines or Southeast Asia in general? Given what we just spoken about, I guess it'd need to be a Philippines chart, wouldn't it?
yeah, I'd need to. I mean, one place I would start with that would be to look at the Aries ingress chart located to is Manila the capital of the
Yep.
Philippines? I know it's okay. Yeah, like located to Manila. But you basically want to locate the moment, the second that the sun enters Aries in a year, and you locate that to a national capital, and that gives you a baseline for looking at how that particular nation will fare over the next year.
Cool. All right. Jen's question is I would respond with the lower base thing. November 2021 is worst of 2021, but worse than the bad months of 2020 or not comparable? And I would just say coming off a low base probably means it's worse.
Uh, it's um, it's yeah. I would say it smells like it smells 2020 bad, but it's not going to be. It's going to be a different flavor,
Yeah.
right? The bads of 2021 and 2022 have Uranus involved, right?
Mhm.
So we're talking about rebellion, revolt, et cetera, going sour, rather than just like the pile of doom bricks. A lot of 2020 a lot of 2020 was just like, enough weight to crush, both the spirit and the body. If you're looking for parallels, we had a preview of the Saturn Uranus square during it was basically April through June of 2020, where we saw lots of revolt. So imagine that, but like with Mars and potentially worse, right? So that would be the kind of bad, right?
Yeah.
And it's easy to like, do large demonstrations ever go bad? Is there ever bloody, violent pushback with further, like, yes, those things. It would be that kind of thing, spiraling out of control and getting violent.
Yeah. Okay. Much to look forward to. Um, Speaking of the fall of Rome, how would you compare, this is Matthew, this Earth to air shift to the Mongol conquest and Alexander the Great's equally transformational project, especially with reference to the boom in technocracy, including astrology, with the Mongol age? I don't know. Do you mean technology and that typed differently? I would technocracy achieving escape velocity is entirely expected now. That's for sure. But I don't know. What do you think? How compared to Mongol conquest and Alexander the Great?
Well, so both of those broke up and scattered, even though it looked like, initially both of those looked like, what was at the time in both places a huge amount of people and territory all being brought under one name. Like that lasted not long at all, right? In both of those cases, people say, oh, the Mongol Empire was the largest land empire that's ever existed, and that's true for the brief time that it existed. But it broke up into feuding khanates pretty immediately, just like Alexander's empire, broke up almost immediately. And you get that even though it looks like like one faction gets a giant win, there's no holding. There's no holding power to that. Like with the result from a historical perspective is actually scattering and a dissemination of technologies, right? It is Alexander's conquest which sets the stage for the emergence of horoscopic astrology in the Eastern Mediterranean, and in the earliest like full horoscopic astrology texts that we have, we can very easily identify distinctly Egyptian, Persian, Babylonian, Greek, etc. elements, which is, you know, a result that's coming out of a couple hundred years of them all being very conversant but not politically unified, right?
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like it. Andrew's got, although I'm a bit confused, can you say something about the healthcare professions, associated professionals, from the perspective of patients? All the healthcare pros are getting the vaccine first. How's that going to go down astrologically? Well, it was announced at an interesting time. What do you think?
If it was my vaccine, I would not have implemented it on a total solar eclipse. That's we need to say that that's not a good omen. That's not a
Yeah.
good omen. Like, it doesn't mean that everybody, you know, everybody grows a second head and a third arm and, you know, dies horribly. Right. But it's like, and if we interpret an eclipse, if we just get away from like, I don't know, like kind of bad, right? If we remove just the value judgment there and just say, what is an eclipse and why does it often correlate with things that humans don't like? It means that there's something that we can't see, right? An eclipse, a solar eclipse, it's a covering of the sun in the middle of the day. We're like, I'm supposed to be able to see that, right? And so there are, in this, astrology is just full of this language and the implication that it's the punch that you don't see coming that knocks you out. It's not necessarily the force of the blow. The houses where difficulties come from are called dark houses because you can't see them properly, right? And it's the, you know, and the eclipses share in that language of you can't see it properly, and so there's a greater threat than there would be otherwise, that there's something, you know, whatever it is, that can't be seen.
I like it. Yeah. Well, it'll play out then. It's interesting that timing it to an eclipse almost like paces it out as well. If it's going to be about eclipse business, then we can kind of go, okay, well, I guess we'll find out later. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Well, and it's weird, you know, on the astrology podcast for December, which we recorded about a month ago, you know, I noticed actually in the middle of the recording that eclipse was on top of the star Russell Hogg, which is the star of Asclepius, the healer. And I was like, that's weird. I guess maybe that's vaccine business, right? But there's a, like, that was a very pointed, you know, like, okay, there's the divine healer star, and then there's a total solar eclipse on top of it. So it's certainly, I don't know how to say, symbolically dense around that moment. Like, it makes perfect sense that it came out then, or that, like, not just came out, but like the first news story and picture of a person taking it happened then.
Ben's question: if we are experiencing vengeance from the victims of the Western Empire, where we see China suffer similar feedback, COVID seems to be working very well for that particular empire at the moment. Well, they are victims of the Western Empire for a start. But China is what happens next. China is the next center of, as it has been before, the next center of the world. That's in the model. So here's the thing. We are in the process of committing some kind of harakiri, according to Armstrong. So it's not necessarily that China has to rise. It's that in some of the scenarios we're looking at, there's a 50% collapse in worldwide GDP in 2022. So China just needs to not fall by that much. So no one's going to have a great time. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
Okay, so if the theme is, should we say, the sort of, if the theme is experiencing the karmic blowback on a national or empire-wide level, China's principal conflicts and sins have been internal over this last 200 years. That's not necessarily true at other points in history, but you know, if we're looking at the quote unquote West, the West's sins have been widely exported, and so yeah, that's different. And I would agree with what you're saying, Gordon, is that China doesn't have to like do anything radically different in order to be in the pole position. And I would remind people that that's the historical norm.
Yep.
China has been one of the most successful, sophisticated, richest civilizations in the world for most of history, right? Like what the China that we got to know in our lifetimes is what China has looked like at the points where either internal or external tensions temporarily disable it, but like an even vaguely healthy China looks like, you know, one of the biggest and most successful civilizations on Earth. Like that's normal historically, and so we're just kind of going back to that.
It's the first time I got, I guess, interested in how cycles would work would have been Cosmic Trigger with Robert Anton Wilson books, because that's the first time I saw the westward movement of capital sort of explained. And you can kind of you can go from Baghdad for like you can go Baghdad, rise of the Venetian city-states, like Spain, England, New York, LA, basically, well, Silicon Valley now, and it's moving to China, and it's this, and then it'll be Europe again. But it's sort of cycles around the world, and you get that in phases. So yeah, China's next. We're just alive in a time where that happens, and as you say, it is a norm, and people kind of miss this. I think it's the wrong way of saying it. I think there's a lot of unbelievably racist stuff bandying around the West at the moment as a preamble to hopefully just an attempted war with China in the next couple of years. And there is some, it's a tyranny like most states, no question. But there's a lot of kind of like not correct, like fucking Mike Pompeo shit around at the moment. And not only is it the historical norm that China is a place of civilization, they also don't give a fuck about the rest of the world, historically speaking. They're you know, it's not an expansionist empire.
That I would say that is a land defined challenge. Like if you're playing like a civilization simulator, it's very different if you're playing England or
Sure.
Great Britain or a Western European nation than if you're playing China. Like you win the game if you can just hold all of China together, right? Bounded in the west by the mountains, the north by the desert, the south by the jungles. If you can just hold what's in between those with the great rivers flowing through it, if you can just hold that together, you absolutely win the game. And that's not necessarily easy, right?
No,
but
no,
those are the victory conditions. Like if you're playing, you know, Great Britain, well, you're an island. You need to make really efficient use of your resources, and you need boats, right? But different games, and different win conditions.
Do you think Australia will suffer under Uranus and Taurus as badly as the rest of the world? We can grow our own food more easily. I think I noticed supermarket prices going up already. Have started experimenting with growing vegetables. Well, you should. We already are. Speaking of China, right? Because God, and this is really saying something with the state of world leaders. We don't have a good one. And so down here, it was great. A couple of months ago, China stopped buying our lobsters, so they were basically free. That was a fun week. But there's a 223% tariff on Australian wines that China has slapped on. Same thing they're not taking our grain, they're not taking the rest of it. So yeah, we're getting, like, the farmers and our food supply is getting fucked because we are stupid enough to enter into a military arrangement with much bigger countries like Japan and the US pointed at China, who is our biggest export market. That's not good governing, right? So yes, Elizabeth, we will also get it. We are in the process of getting it. Anything else you want to add to that other than like Scott Morrison's a moron? I don't know. Cool. Kelsey's got, as is usual for them, a very Kelsey question, and I'm just trying to scroll through. I've been holding those off till the end because I want to keep it traditional. They can have the last question. There's a few that we sort of covered during the show. Can you see the energy industry's move towards clean energy take hold? No. And clean energy is an air cover. So Bill Gates has actually invested in small-scale nuclear plants in the Pacific Northwest now, because the smart grid clean greenwash energy, which doesn't work, is actually backstopped by it. So all of that stuff is part of the, like, that's a technocratic greenwash. So like, we'll see more of it, but it won't be clean energy. It will be energy that will be efficiently allocated to you. So you might be washing your clothes at 2 a.m. How will the continued trend of the dominant of wider inclusions fare going forward? Will this next triplicity complement it, or will the dominant science have a continued life? It won't go away, but this is that triplicity. So this is that dominant, because how dominants work, and this is why Fort is better than Kuhn, is that the previous methods of truth making no longer work. Kuhn seems to think that they are the same and we just get better at it. So we have science, and science is correct about these things, and we get better. And so this is this light, that the bit of the cosmos that is illuminated ever expands. And that's Kuhn and his revolutions. Ford is like, nope. And things are literally differently true in different dominants. And if you see this triplicity changeover happening now, look at what is happening. All that is solid is melting into air, quite literally. So we have a complete collapse in the belief in governance in all its forms. We are witnessing a collapse in medicine. Any of these kind of cornerstones, academia and all the rest of it, any of the cornerstones that held up things that are true in the previous triplicity are gone already. There is no returning, and rightly so, because they're all corrupt across the board. There is no returning to a sense of, oh, well, this politician said it, so it must be true. And we're witnessing that across the board. So this is it. Fort didn't realize it, but we're talking about the same transformational, civilizational shift, right? That's my take on it anyway.
Yeah, well, I like that contrast of Kuhn and Fort. And the image that evoked for me pretty immediately was the difference between a model of an expanding light versus a revolving light, right? Kuhn's basically positing a sun that gets brighter, every 100 years.
Yeah.
Whereas Ford is postulating something a little bit more like our relationship to the sun or star, where as we take a different angle to it, different things are illuminated, or the same things are illuminated but from a different angle, and so what we can see is different.
Yeah, I mean,
I would just so that's not too chaotic, I would also look at, in terms of truth, what truths have endured different eras very well, right? Like what has remained true through earth and air and water and fire and over and over and over again, because those are going to be things those are the resilient things.
Sure. I would just say, I would go backwards on that and say, I think it's a migration of epistemologies, and you kind of accidentally hit on it. So I don't think anything is true other than the migration of epistemologies, but the relationality. So the difference, and this is the earth to air and dominant of science to wider inclusions, is that in the dominant of science, you are told what reality is. This scientist, this politician tells you. Where we are now is the truth emerges relationally. So this is the animist mode. It's why I'm writing that book, so that we are epistemologically and thus ontologically constituted relationally in the new dominant. And that's real air stuff, right? And it's not, I'm not surprised as we move into it that we have this kind of like great. It's almost it feels very Norse somehow. The kind of the Aquarius conference that's coming up. There's something about it that kind of like it like this sort of epochal gathering of gods to get the update. But it doesn't surprise me viewing it from a Fortean perspective that that's the next thing that comes immediately after the conjunction, because that it's really an Aquarian ontology. You put all the gods in Aquarius, you have a permanently relational method of making things true, because it's not it's airy rather than earthed. And I don't know. I'm thinking more about that.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Well, we sort of to take that image. You know, what is true for a period of time is what the gods all agree on being true.
I love it. Yeah, I love it. It's all right. So I'm just going to see if we got anything else we need to, because these are all more answering Austin's question. Yeah, very good. Cool. Well, as the premium members know, when we get to Kelsey, that's the last of the questions. Might not be, it might trigger something, but as typical for them, it's Aquarian. This is a speculative question focused on astrological timing of ritual, one which invites leveraging experiences to speculate on a non-traditional approach. I was surprised a few weeks ago by a spirit I'd been developing a relationship with, encouraging an off-book approach to timing on a project she is assisting me with. The project involves distillation of non-traditional properties of Venus originating in another culture into an object that is functionally talismanic. So the question is how one might distill multiple elections into a single object. The impression I've got is that this would involve a series of major rituals connected over several decades, possibly generations, maintained by daily prayers to keep the ritual going. Cue the objections at the electional moment. That matters is the one that begins the ritual, but the spirit is insisting that there is an alternate modality of engaging in stellar magic, which takes place over time. Thoughts from respected colleagues requested.
Yeah, I don't know. That sounds good.
So, my immediate thought, if it was going to be like a multi-electional object, would be kind of like Lucifer's breastplate or something. So I would pick a bunch of stones, and that would be how I would do it rather than keeping it alive. But it does remind me of kind of like, which we've spoken about privately, Austin, sort of Pucallpa lineage shamans, and how they can spend several days kind of like silently imbuing spirits into a particular spirit object. So the game is kind of like, how long can you do that? And we will have a modified version of that as one of the practice things in the Angels course. But that's how I would go about it, because I'm kind of which is weird, having done some off-book experimentation in younger years when it comes to talisman construction in particular, getting kind of lazy, like, oh, fuck it, I'll fudge this material or I'll do that. Didn't really work that well. So I try to stay as precise as possible. But if it were me, I would do, if it's an object that has to hold multiple elections, I would go down like a multiple gemstone or something similar route and end up with the breastplate of Lucifer or something, or breastplate of Aaron or the crown of Lucifer.
Yeah, and that's, you know, it's interesting about that. In a sense, what you're doing then is you're building a house and then inviting different different spirits or powers to all take up residence in that house or that containing structure, right?
Yeah.
Which is, you know, that's, I would say that that's not off book in the sense that that's something people have done for a while. The timing of each individual invitation should probably be quite good.
Yes.
Right. And it depends, you know, part of the reason that, you know, Picatrixian talismans are so nitpicky is because you're inviting planetary powers. And, you know, who cares a lot about timing? Planets care a lot about timing, right? We could also say that they're, and with the Picatrix, is having recently reread it again, there are many points in it where you were advised to literally like consider when this planet is in this phase in relationship to the Earth, it's in this mood, and you can ask it for the things that it would give in that mood, right? And so there is as in a lot of the Picatrix stuff, there's a hidden relationality, and if just to stick with this metaphor of inviting spirits to take up residence in a containing structure, you don't say, "Hey, will you move in with me?" When somebody's in a terrible mood, right? You try to time that invitation.
I like that. Yeah. So I think that's good. I think it also, so if the I think about it, if it's modular, you can replace bits that didn't take, right? So if the Venus stuff, if you do and I'm thinking of how the Maya historically, so classical Maya saw Venus as the war planet and they would go to war when it was in particular locations, and it has to do with, which is why we associate it with Lucifer. It's kind of shaped through the sky, looks like the throwing of a spear. It's like slow up and fast down. So there's a phenomenological match to an actual weapon. So I would, if it were me, Kelsey, I would have that one as separate. Like, let's assume I'm being called, a spirit's telling me like, no, you can actually use like the Venus timings from Picatrix to get like a spear or a martial component to the talisman, or a war component, not martial. I'd give that a shot, and because if it didn't take, I'll be able to remove that piece. So my suggestion would be, my suggestion is modularity in the object would be where I would go.
Well, and one note just about Venus timing: you want a morning rising Venus. Morning rising Venus is much more aggressive than evening rising.
Interesting. So descending Venus would be, in the Maya context.
Well, the thing is, you have an
painful.
Up and down. You have an up and down in both the evening and morning. Both phases have a increasing brightness and height, and then a drop into obscurity. And then after the period of darkness, Venus switches horizons. So both of them have that structure. But morning rising Venus is much more aggressive.
Nice,
much more assertive, I think, is the right word.
Yeah, cool. I'm into that. All right. Well, there's a load more of them, but we've chatted for 2 hours, and we did the Danny part at the beginning and what have you. So I think we should call it an evening/afternoon now here in Australia, because we've been going that long. So guys, thank you for attending, and thanks for your awesome questions. And once again, whenever I do these things, I can kind of see the chat in the corner of my eye going, man, that would be fun. That would be fun to be in. So I hope you got a lot out of it. I certainly did. And once again, Mr. Coppock, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It's always fun.
I know. I look forward to these.
My payment for this is I get to plug stuff, right?
Oh, yeah, go for it.
And I'm not supposed to have to ask. But
well, that's what we've got time for. Anyway, go for it.
Yeah, so 2021, teaching my year-long classes, right? Which is about 8 months of study. Gonna get some books done. Going to continue collaborating with Sphere and Sundry on the ongoing work of Curious Creations. And don't have any live dates. No events scheduled.
No, it's so weird, isn't it? Because we have to do, well, we'll talk about this bit. It's not questions or anything. Because 2020 has been such a horror show, I can't believe it's been 2 years since you guys were here, because it somehow feels like it was last year, but also 50 years ago at the same time. But ordinarily we would have something that we'd be like, and we've got As Further Above, or as you know, we've been joking, like the next one it'd have to be on a cruise ship. And then cruise ships
we should say, I think it's worth taking a minute to say what what our when you and I and Kate sat down after the Portland event, we had an event that we were thinking would be located exactly right now on the Jupiter Saturn conjunction.
Yep.
And it was, half fantasy, but I think it fits, right? We were going to be on a boat, and it was going to be called Event Horizon, because we did
Yep.
above and below. And in our imaginations, it could have been on the equator exactly.
Yeah.
And
If
so
not,
it was the right image. It just not physically possible.
no, yeah. If like, the equator in the Caribbean, and then we would have done like Tulum or something afterwards, it would have been great. But anyway, probably wouldn't have ever happened, because it's like, let's do a cruise ship. Just seemed to be, that was all that was left after the last two. But I can't believe it. Anyway, yeah, good times. And that's what I mean. Like, you're talking about 2021 classes. It's so weird that we've just been through a whole year. And you said books in plural. Any more on that, or just want to leave it mysteriously at books?
Oh, I'll leave it at books. One can easily be guessed at, an update of a previously published tome, and then I have 4 or 5 book projects that I've been sitting on for a couple of years, and I'm going to make space for them. And so we'll see how many I get done and how fast, but I will commit to books in 2021 rather than book.
I like it. All right. Well, always good. And everyone in the chat, once again, thank you so much. This is, I look forward to these. I really do. And I like the interview ones, because it's sort of an indication that Christmas is here in a funny way. After all we spoke about, this is still kind of like the Christmas episode. So have a good one, and have a Merry Christmas to the people in the chat and listen.
All right.